welcome to the latest episode of Intellectual Conversations. Today I'm joined by Patrick Wall, who is a former monk and priest and fixer for the Catholic Church, who now works as an analyst with a law firm helping people who are victims of abuse in the Catholic Church. And Patrick's somebody I've wanted to talk to for quite some time. I've seen him in a couple of documentaries. The first was Mia Maxima Culpa by Alex Gibney about the abuse going on in a home for deaf boys. And then I saw him again in Ken Tiller's Bullshit on the Vatican, where he was talking about one of the documents we're going to talk about today. So welcome, Patrick. Thank you for taking the time to join with us today. Maybe just give my viewers a quick introduction as to who you are and what you do.
Sure. Patrick Hall, and I essentially help survivors of childhood sexual abuse. And the reason I can do that is because as a former Roman Catholic priest and Benedictine monk, I was assigned after I came back from graduate school to help survivors of childhood sexual assault. And the reason I can do that is because of my years as a priest and monk. That came about not because of something that I was called to, but something that I was ordered to under obedience. And all of my assignments as a priest were to follow monks who were child molesters and had been removed for credible accusations of childhood sexual assault. And then while working in the parish and in the dormitory, I was assigned to investigate cases. And I also worked in the tribunal and on the finance council for the Archdiocese of St. Paul, Minneapolis. So I got to see not only how the legal world worked, but also how the financial world worked in order to be able to keep that circle of secrecy in the 1990s that we had on childhood sexual assault.
So that's actually one of the questions I had. So you are fairly newly ordained or just out of seminary when they assigned you to be the fixer. So why would they have picked somebody, a novice with no little to no experience to do this? Was that a tactical move on their part, you think, to pick somebody young that they could control?
No, I think it was pure desperation. There were just not enough bodies. There literally were 13 lawsuits filed in in August when I was assigned to go and work in the dormitory. So it's purely need, and I happened to be available, and I would follow the abbot's order to go that day. I mean, the abbot literally came to me after morning prayer in August, the day school was starting, and said, "You're going to Second Mary to be the faculty resident." So it was, I just happened to be one of the guys that would be obedient enough to follow orders.
Okay. And did you have any academic training to do these kind of investigations, or this was something you just learned on the job?
Absolute baptism by fire. And I worked underneath the monk who was the lawyer and canon lawyer in charge of all the cases. And so I learned um, literally in the law office of the monastery.
So you were investigating monks. So you weren't. So most people are aware of the sexual abuse scandal as it stands. Most people think of it as the priests and and the nuns that are abusing children in schools and homes. So how were monks like? Are these monks that were abusing novices within the monastery or abusing children in the world?
These are monks who are abusing children in the school at St. John's on campus. And then I was assigned to parishes. So that was the first assignment. And because I apparently did sufficiently well enough, then unfortunately I was assigned to parishes to follow monks who were assigned to parishes that had sexually assaulted children in those parishes.
Okay. So when you first dove into this, as you said, it was a baptism by fire. Like, was this something that shocked you to your core, or you were kind of aware this was going on even before?
I was utterly naive in the process. I thought these were small individual cases of, you know, guys making just horrendous criminal mistakes, and it took me 6 years, honestly, pretty slow learner, to figure out after working on dozens and dozens of cases that it's not only in every religious order, but it's in every diocese, and it's in every diocese across the world, no matter what language is spoken or no matter what culture it is. It's actually in the Roman DNA of Roman Catholic priests.
Okay. So that's quite a scary revelation. So how did you reconcile that with your faith? Like did that lead to a crisis of conscience for you in any way?
Oh yeah, you can't reconcile that, uh, Jason. There's no reconciliation between criminal behavior and the sexual assault of children, and then the institution's response to giving deferential treatment to the priests who are criminal doing the criminal acts. And I came to the conclusion that this is not going to change in any concrete way. There is no authority. There's no motivation. There is no moral fortitude for the institution itself to change. And so, for to me to live some form of authentic life, uh, I felt I had to leave.
So how many years were you doing the acting as a fixer before you'd had enough?
Yeah, I was a priest for 6 years, and so I
Six.
got to
Okay.
see dozens of cases, even including an auxiliary bishop.
So it was 6 years and you'd had enough. You couldn't take it anymore. You had to get out for your own sanity, your own moral ethic, I presume. Okay.
Yep. So I left in 1997. Yeah.
Okay. So can you maybe just describe a little bit when you were investigating these cases, what sort of things were you having to do?
Well, it's following up with the survivors in the parish, and reporting that on to the vicar general, and so it was literally reporting that he was not even staying in the confines of his aftercare contract and coming back from the St. Luke Institute. That's how badly managed perpetrators were back then. Um, it's if you find out about cases, then you either settle those cases or you get the people to the church officials in order to get the cases settled. Because the vast majority of survivors don't want to have a public trial. They would much rather see the church do the right thing, take the perpetrator out of ministry, um, make amends, and basically say they're sorry. It's only when you just get time after time after time where they geographically uh, find a solution and just move the perpetrator. That's when survivors finally get mad and go to a public court system.
Yeah. So they're not being removed as they wanted. They're actually just being shuffled around, like which is what we saw in the movie Spotlight that revealed like how they're just being moved from place to place. So okay. So you weren't necessarily involved in the removal. You were more involved in the investigation and the negotiations with the victims and their families. Was
Yeah,
your
then I
primary
would be
role.
the guy that when a priest was removed, then I would be the guy sent in to follow to run the parish.
Oh, you would actually step in and run it after that person was removed. Okay. And
Yeah.
so and you were doing this over and over and over again. So okay.
Oh yeah. So the pattern was really clear. This is probably what I was going to do for the rest of my life.
That must have been quite emotional for you to be in that situation, to see this rape of children and what's being done to them. Like surely that must have been having a psychological toll on your own well-being, I would assume.
When you hear the confession of a priest or a monk who has sexually assaulted a child, and you have the confessional privilege that you have to maintain that, keeping that quiet, that is a horrendous burden to carry.
And like I'm not Catholic, nor but I would presume priests also confess. Priests and monks have confessors themselves. So, or did you have somebody senior to you that you could confess, like that you're carrying this heavy, heavy burden, or you just kept this to yourself?
professional secrecy. You have to keep it to yourself.
But you couldn't even go to a senior person for your own confession and state what you were going through. You had to keep all that secret.
No,
Okay.
the code is very clear. The church's teaching is very clear. There are no exceptions to confessional secrecy.
So even when you as a priest are confessing to a bishop or somebody, you can't break that confessional seal. Interesting. Okay, I did not know that. Okay. All right. So then after 6 years, so what you're dealing with these victims, and what was your take on their attitude? Like were some of them like I would assume some of them were quite furious at just seeing priests being moved around, maybe getting a token settlement for their pain and suffering. Like was that really irritating for the Catholic victims?
Well,
Like
it's the most it's the
go ahead.
most desecrating thing you can do to a child. I mean, you forever change that person's trajectory of life. You literally damage their brain when they're sexually assaulted. And so it affects everything they do and everything they think and everything they feel. It's it's the most catastrophic thing short of homicide that you can literally do to a child. And so as they grow up, the maladaptive behaviors that they have to take on in order to eat the pain of that crime are severe.
And so did you feel guilty at all in helping to like shortchange these victims, or did you feel that you were acting in their best interest, or did you feel that you were really being used as a pawn by the church to cover this up and shut them up and make them go away?
Well, that's the one piece is that at the beginning, of course, you think you're helping people, right? That's and you're bringing some solace to that individual because at least they have some priest who's saying they're on behalf of the institution that we're sorry, that it did happen, recognizing it did happen, and apologizing. But then after you've gone to a number of canon law meetings around the country and you see that you are just one of hundreds uh, who are out fixing the same crime over and over again. Um, I'll never forget one of the trainings I was at Catholic University where Monsignor Shakluna came over from the Congregation of Doctrine of the Faith to give us instruction on how to handle a petition for involuntary laicization for a priest who sexually assaulted a minor. And, the room is full of guys who are all doing exactly the same thing. And that's overwhelming to know that the scale, this is the 90s, to know that the scale was that big.
And yeah, so this is like a decade before the Spotlight investigation. That was what, January of 2002, if I remember. So this
Yeah,
is going on. This is like a decade before the Boston Globe even broke the story of how big this cover up was.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I think one of the key things is that when I left, I never thought any of this would get out in the open because it's so locked down in attorney-client privilege. It's locked down in priest-penitent privilege. It's locked down in papal privilege. When you sign off on the pontifical secret, you can't talk about any of that stuff.
And so this, do you think that was designed to shield the church from criticism? Like that you cannot
Oh,
talk about
yeah.
this?
Yeah, when you step back and you see all of the systems that are in place, systems like the creation of the Servants of the Paraclete in Jemez Springs, New Mexico, as a religious order just to deal with fallen priests, or the creation of the St. Luke Institute in order to treat uh, priests who sexually assaulted children. Treat, in the sense that they put them through a medical evaluation, but then they essentially clear them and send them back out to a different place where they're not known. When you see the millions and millions of dollars and the hundreds of people involved in this particular system of cover-up, it's just emotionally overwhelming.
And so if you couldn't confess this to your own priest or confessor, how did you deal with this? Like, did you have external like friends that you could talk to about what you were going through, or you just had to swallow this and deal with it in silence?
You can talk to some of your friends that are in the circle of trust, yeah, but again, they're all priests, right? You're all in this society,
Together.
secret society, and um, there's no resolution to it. It's uh, when you're late 20s, early 30-year-old, and you can see what it's going to be like for the next 30 or 40 years like this. Um, it's just terribly depressing.
Yeah. Did you need to get any psychological counseling to deal with all the horrific things you were dealing with?
Oh, I spoke to my spiritual director. Sure, absolutely, yeah. And um, the bottom line is you either um, have to come up with some type of mental hoops that you jump through, thinking that you're doing this for the greater good somehow, or you have to make personal changes in your own life, which are really difficult because the ultimate answer for me uh, is you just have to disengage from that system and go live an authentic life instead of a bifurcated life.
And that's what you felt you needed to do, was to live your authentic self. You couldn't deal with this anymore. This
No,
bifurcated life. Yeah. Interesting.
you know,
So then when you left, did you immediately, so you now work for a law firm that is representing the victim. So was that an immediate transition that you went right from the priesthood to working for a law firm, or did you take some time
no,
off and just do something different?
yeah, no. I was just a regular guy doing a regular sales job. Nothing really uh, exciting or anything like that. And then in 2001, I started getting calls to testify regarding, um, what the church knew, and then it just ballooned from there. So I've worked with prosecutors, I've worked with grand juries, worked with bankruptcy lawyers and civil lawyers, and that's basically all I do. There are so many thousands of cases around the world that it's as far as I can tell in my lifetime, it's not going to end.
It wasn't, you're based in LA, wasn't it just the LA diocese just got pinged like $1 billion or close to $1 billion fine? Was it at Los Angeles? I think it was LA. I could be wrong.
Correct. It's Archdiocese of Los Angeles. Yeah, that was the second major settlement in 20 years. And I can also tell you, though, it's not the end. There are still um, a lot of survivors out there who haven't come forward. And don't be surprised in another 5 or 10 years, there's going to be uh, another round of hundreds of cases, and you'll see another gigantic settlement.
So it's been 20 almost 25 years since Spotlight broke the scandal of this massive cover up. So even in the wake of that and the changes they have done to put in to combat this, there's still all these thousands of cases that are emerging that are post 2002. These aren't cases you're talking about of, from decades ago. But yes, there will be some of those, but these are going to be fresh cases coming forward.
Yeah, no, we just had another priest here in Los Angeles, technically Ventura County, but in the Archdiocese of Los Angeles, and he just got sentenced, for felony child possession of child imagery, and he's going to do a year in jail. And this is a 30-year-old guy who went through the modern program of priestly formation, where all of this was supposedly going to be weeded out, and they're going to teach celibacy like Richard Sipe told them to do back in the 90s, and all of that. And the conduct continues, the crimes continue, and you just don't. There's no abatement.
Yeah, you would think the rates of abuse might have dropped given the scope of scrutiny that's been going on in the church for the last 25 years since the Spotlight story broke. That you'd think He said they have made changes. I did have a previously another guy out your way, also a former monk priest who's now he's a clinical psychologist out there in California, um, but he's also gay. So we had a conversation a couple weeks ago about the homosexuality that's prevalent in the church, and even
Oh,
he was
yeah.
talking about it, like what's like everyone in the seminary is fooling around. It's an open secret. But we're not confusing, obviously not confusing pedophilia with homosexuality. These are
No, no.
completely separate issues. But he did he did make the point that the seminaries now, where the seminaries used to take boys right out of high school. Now the seminaries, they want people they're older, they're more mature, they've gone to university and gotten undergrad and primarily a master's degree before they're even taken into the seminary. And still you're seeing these problems, even with an older cohort coming into the seminaries that be older and more mature and psychosexually developed, and they're not.
Yeah, well, you got to realize this is a international business. This is a large worldwide organization, and there are different standards from all over the world. So, for instance, we happen to have a so-called zero tolerance policy in the United States Church, but that's not the worldwide policy. And so people can be brought in from all kinds of places. And so the problem continues and or if a problem develops here, then you simply move them to a different jurisdiction. So um, there's just a systemic chronic problem of childhood sexual abuse. And when it comes to the sexual activity of the clergy, I think it's really important to note that there have been reports for decades now about the immaturity of priests and and about the lack of human development, which is code word for these guys are basically uh, sexually they're at high school level of development.
Yeah. I had, maybe you could speak to this. So for years I'd had my understanding of the pedophilia in the Catholic Church was that this was a result of the repression, the celibacy and the repression of their sexual desires was manifesting itself as a pedophile. And then a couple of years ago, I was watching a documentary. It was on, I believe it was on Michael Jackson, and the psychologist, she made a really interesting point. She said predators will seek out employment where they have access. And I thought, oh, that's so they're not becoming pedophiles. These are pedophiles who have
Nope,
actively sought out the church as cover.
that's exactly right. And when you look at the 3,000 plus priests that have gone on the servants of the Paraclete facilities around the world, and then the priests that have gone through houses of affirmation, the St. Luke Institute, the Shalom Center, all kinds of different centers that the church runs. It's very clear that these folks cannot be treated. That there is a certain um, element of them that's disordered. And so it's not that the seminary system made them this way. It's that this is a way that they have found where they can find expression. So, for instance, a perpetrator will volunteer to be a a junior high basketball coach because that's their target population. Or a perpetrator will seek out to become a pediatrician because that's how they get access to their target population. So essentially, all priests are that turn out to be perpetrators are folks that have figured out a way to commit white collar crime. So they're doing their crimes in the course and scope of their work. So it looks legitimate.
And right. And so these people sought out the priesthood and the church as a vocation because one, they knew they'd have access, and two, they knew they'd be protected. Would you say that's a fair assessment?
Yeah, and I mean, there's no better place than the church because you have 7 days a week access to children. When you, after running parishes, I can tell you that there are always kids around because you have schools, you have masses every day, and yeah, there's always access if you have nefarious criminal intent, you have access to what you're after.
Okay. Just interesting point there. So the Catholic Church, you do a mass every day?
Oh yeah, as a priest,
Oh,
you're required. Yeah,
okay. Because like, well, I grew up Protestant, so like we only had communion like on like specific holidays like Easter or Christmas or certain church big high
right.
days. That's the only time we didn't do it. It certainly wasn't every Sunday, and it certainly wasn't every day. I didn't realize that the priests were doing mass every single day. Okay,
Oh,
interesting.
it's daily, and then of course the school kids are. Uh, um, if you're going to a Catholic school, you're being sent to mass at least every week, too. Yeah,
Okay, interesting. So yeah, I knew it was. I just learned that recently in the course of my research that it was mass was done every week, but I didn't know it was every single day. I just assumed there was a mass on Sunday. So interesting. Okay. All right.
but
So
today is the feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe, so it's even though it's Thursday, um, yeah, there'd be a big celebration.
interesting. Yeah, yeah, Catholics in their feast days. So, Protestant, we didn't. I knew of them, but we certainly didn't follow them. So okay.
Right.
So now, so we've talked about the work you did. Now, I did a video a couple weeks ago. You and I were just chatting about this before we went to and recorded. So I did a video a couple weeks ago linking the forgeries of the Catholic Church, starting with the Acts of Sylvester, which leads to the donation of Constantine, that the Catholic Church is above the law. And that has led to this attitude of the modern Catholic Church that when the sexual abuse scandal was coming out, that no, we don't really need to, we know we'll handle this internally. We don't need to go to the secular authorities for this. So would you say that's a fair assumption that the history of the Catholic Church has given it this false impression that it thinks it's above the law?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, you just look at the particular acts of how guys have been handled, because culture trumps practice and custom every single time. I'll give you the example of a priest who got caught with child porn in the papal nuncio's office in Washington, D.C. a few years ago, Monsignor Carlo. And as soon as the Holy See found out that the criminal referral had been made from the State Department through diplomatic channels to the nuncio's office, they put him on an airplane in Dulles that day and flew him back to Rome to get him out of the jurisdiction. So he did not stay to face the crimes that he did. He yet was allowed to flee under the papal diplomatic cover back to the Holy See. And there's just example after example where they believe that they are above the law.
Right. Okay. So, and then I mentioned in the video that I did, so I'll turn it over to you because I'll probably butcher the pronunciation. There was a 1961-62 document, Crimen Solicitationis. Is that
Cassione,
close?
yes. Yeah.
So can you maybe just talk about what that is, like a little bit about the history? I know you talked about it, I believe in the Vatican, the bullshit episode on the Vatican, you were talking about that. So maybe just a little bit of background on that, I think would be really interesting for people.
Yeah, that procedure has been updated many, many times. So the 1962 edition is an update, and it is what to do, not if, but what to do when a priest either solicits sex in the confessional or solicits a penitent to for sexual activity outside the confessional. So it's a very specific crime. Because remember, in the confessional, there are only two parties. There's the priest and the penitent. So there are no witnesses other than those two. And so that's why this is a very hard crime to not only investigate, but also to prove. So in this particular case, the document reiterates very strongly that if a penitent is solicited uh, for sex by that priest, the penitent has a moral obligation to report that. And then the document talks about how to investigate it and then how to report it to the Holy See. And the important thing is, Crimen Solicitationis is simply an update from the 1922 procedure. And then you look at the 1922 procedure. This is typical Roman law research, right? The 1922 procedure is based on a prior procedure, a Sacramentum Penitentiae in 1741 by Pope Benedict the 15th. So you have or 14th, and so you have this long crime, an exact tradition of how to investigate it, how to document it, how to report it, and then the penalties that are supposed to come from it. And so when they talk about, well, you'll hear all of this, and these procedures only exist in the bishop's file. So it's not like this is handed out everywhere.
And so how would a
So this
penitent know they have the duty to report it if the penitent only the bishops know about it?
that is the great quandary, and this gets us to what I think is the heart of the matter. When the bishops have specifically never prepared the people of God to be able to know what to do when a priest sexually abuses a child. They have not taught them. They have not given them the philosophical categories. They have not given them the epistemology. They have not given them the language. They have not given them the moral permission to actually do something about this. And that is the greatest part of the cover-up, is even though the bishops have known for centuries that this is a problem, and as a young priest, before they become the bishop, they deal with these particular crimes, they have never done anything to help the people of God to what to do when kids are sexually assaulted by priests.
It's about protecting the system and the institution and the priest.
It comes down to that they're above the law, and they think that a priest is ontologically changed at ordination and is a greater, more important person than any child. And
That's
it's
pretty,
just it's a horrendous
that's the word I was thinking
philosophical
of.
problem.
Yeah, horrendous is the word I was thinking. So now one of the people who objected to the video that I did made a comment that so I said because the church thinks it's above the law, they did not report this to when a bishop does know, they don't report it to the secular law enforcement.
Right.
And it said even in this document, this 1962 document, it says under crime of excommunication, you will keep this quiet. And this person said, and your co-author on Sex, Priests, and Secret Codes, Thomas Doyle, he cited him saying, even Thomas Doyle has said there's nothing in Crimen Solicitationis that states they cannot go to secular authority. And I'm like, yeah, but you're missing the under pain of excommunication clause.
Yeah, you're missing the papal secret. Sorry.
Yeah.
Because, dude, when you sign off on that papal secret element, if you report, it's an automatic excommunication. And as far as being a priest goes, being excommunicated is really bad. That means you can no longer function in your world, in your life. You are done by that act alone. It is beyond breaking a confidentiality order and turning over government secrets to on WikiLeaks or something. I mean, it is a complete break of anything, and at that point, the bishop has to excommunicate you. So
Yeah.
the whole of the procedure doesn't say is like missing Mount Rushmore and saying, well, there's no scratch on one of the president's noses. It's the gigantic hill that's there. The premise is you do not speak up and report, period.
Yeah. Even though it doesn't explicitly say you cannot go, it's obviously implied. if not explicit, in the excommunication clauses and the papal secret, as you mentioned.
It's very explicit in the papal secret, which you have to sign off on, which is part of the larger procedure.
Right. Now, this person, this commenter also said Thomas Doyle has made this point that there's nothing that states this explicitly. So you talked to Thomas about this. So can you give us Thomas's perspective?
Well, that's the minutia. To be absolutely intellectually honest, compared to all the other people we have to deal with, it is true when you look at the procedure, that is true. But you're not. You have to look at the totality of it rather than just the narrow single procedure as it sits there. So it's unfortunately it's a very narrow Jesuitical answer that you if pushed, that's what you have to say. But that's not what the spirit of the law is and what the larger law is.
Right. And like you said, it states it's been a while since I've read the document, but I do believe there is a clause that states under pain of excommunication in that document, correct?
Correct.
Right. And then even the last update to the Catholic canon law came, I believe, in 2021 with another update that said any any reports of sexual abuse must be reported dot 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 to your superior in the church, not
Right.
to secular authorities. And the
Oh no.
victims groups jumped all over it.
Right. It's the same. The tradition is continued, right? That nothing has changed there, and it's not going to help making a report to a bishop or an abbot or a provincial of a religious order because they also are not going to make a report to secular authority because their obligation is, according to the procedure, is to report that to the Congregation of Doctrine of the Faith, who
Keep it all in
makes
house.
the determination of what to do.
And it still won't be to report it to secular authority.
Nope.
Unbelievable. Okay, so earlier we were just chatting before we recorded. So I've recently finished reading John Cornwell's book, The Pope in Winter. I believe the subtitle is The Dark Face of John Paul's Papacy. And Cornwell lays the sexual abuse scandal squarely at the feet of John Paul, that he knew what was going on and he kept everything quiet, like especially the Marcial Maciel in Mexico because he was a friend of the Pope. But the point that Cornwell made, so for just a quick history lesson for viewers who might not know it. So Pope John the 23rd called the Second Vatican Council, which was supposed to be very collegial in nature, returned some of the power back to the bishops that had been accreted to the papacy over the ensuing decades and centuries. And then along comes John Paul, who was at Vatican II, and then re-centralizes and makes the papacy very autocratic, very top down. And then Cornwell makes the point that the bishops, even though they knew a crime was going on, didn't report it because they didn't think they had the authority, because John Paul had centralized authority so much into his hands and the Vatican Curia that the bishops didn't know what to do. Would you say that's an accurate understanding, or maybe he's maybe missed a point?
A couple things I would say that he missed. Number one, that the bishops knew what to do. The bishops were making complaints to the Holy See and requesting that guys be involuntarily laicized and dismissed from the priesthood, but that John Paul II specifically was not allowing those laicizations to happen. That's one of the core essences of the movie Mea Maxima Culpa, that the complaints were coming from the Archbishop of Milwaukee, and the Holy See would not dismiss the priest in charge of the deaf school. When you look at the Diocese of Oakland, they had exactly, with Keesley, they had exactly the same story. They could not get the Holy See off of their hands to laicize the priest. When you look at the story of Maciel Macier, the Holy See was aware in 1958, and then under John Paul II, they specifically looked the other way. They knew that Maciel was sexually abusing minors, um, and they did not involuntarily laicize him as the head of the Legionnaires of Christ. And it's just case after case. The bishops complained that if a priest was under the age of 40, under no circumstances would John Paul II laicize anyone, because only he had the authority to do that. And so what happens is they give up. They honestly just throw their hands up in the air because they don't have the moral courage then to call the secular authorities. This all could have been easily taken care of by a few bishops calling the local prosecutor and getting those priests arrested. But that's not the way your Roman training tells you. Your Roman training tells you follow the chain of command.
Interesting. So you would think, laicization would be in the hands of the archbishop, and people under him, that, that wouldn't be so centralized that only the Pope can do that. So, and
Only
so,
the
and the,
Pope can do that.
and so John Paul, even knowing it, was refusing to act.
Even having the facts, yes.
Okay. So Cornwell is correct then to lay this at the feet of John Paul. So he missed the point then where he's saying the bishops didn't feel they had the authority. It was that the bishops were trying and getting nowhere.
Bishops were trying and getting nowhere, and they weren't able to think outside the system of their training.
And you would think somebody would have been morally outraged enough to have at least leaked it to the police. But maybe
Think
some of
one
them
of
did
them,
secretly.
not a single one of them that I'm aware of. Not one.
So they just follow their training that, we see this horrific abuse, but we don't call the police.
Correct. La Familia.
That's a lot like brainwashing, sounds like.
It is. And, that in some ways, that's what seminary systems unfortunately do, that the primary virtue is obedience. And we're not talking about mutual listening, obediencia. We're talking about following orders.
Unbelievable. And so now you work for a law firm now, working with the victims. So like
Correct.
how many cases, like you've like hundreds of cases, thousands, or you're only you just deal with a handful at a time?
Well, there are hundreds of cases that get bogged down in all of these bankruptcies. So they get filed in civil actions, and then the bishops have learned to use the bankruptcy code in order to lock up all the litigation and to shut it down. So right now there are thousands of cases across dozens of jurisdictions that are stuck in bankruptcy court. Yep.
Yeah. So are you working like, do you provide counseling to the victims as well, or do you refer them on, or you're more of an investigator?
I'm an investigator. I work with survivor doing the intake, and then in the litigation piece is going after the specific documents, because on the civil side, we have to prove that the bishops knew or should have known of a well-known danger of childhood sexual assault. It's not really difficult to get at because the documents in the secret archives are so thick. The priest files are so thick. You can see in the examples that have been forced out into the open, whether it's Chicago or New York or Los Angeles, wherever. There's now a very large new archive that's come online at the University of New Mexico on the servants of the Paraclete. And, the knowledge that the bishops have and the specific knowledge of how priest predators work is quite ornate. And so the only good thing I can see coming from the litigation is forcing the documents out. And so in the future, scholars will be able to study this. The tragedy is that if the bishops wanted to, the bishops could teach society a lot about sex offenders because the bishops literally have the largest database of non-incarcerated sex offenders in the United States.
Yeah, but they can't share it. And so you can get a court order, presumably, or a warrant, and go in and seize these documents from the church files.
Yep, it's the civil courts that force it out in the open. The bishops don't do it willingly. Um, this could have been cleaned up in the 80s and the 90s with a little moral courage. We wouldn't be
Yeah.
battling this today.
Well,
If
as you said, like this, this goes back to 1922 and the 1700s.
yep,
I read, came out 2 years ago, about 2 years ago, David Kircher's book, The Pope at War, about Pius XII during World War II.
mhm,
And I believe that was in that book. It might have been that one of the immediate predecessor book leading up to World War II, Pope and Mussolini, but I think it was in Pope at War. He mentions um, that there was, I think, from the bishops of Berlin and Breslau, there were orders to burn and shred any documents related to priestly abuse going on in Germany. So even in like 19, in the 1930s or like 39 through 45, you know, there were orders from the church to hide these documents from the Germans.
yeah, and it's very well documented also in the United States. There's a document from a bishop instructing other bishops and canon lawyers to specifically get rid of documents prior to a subpoena arriving, and that if you feel you can't get rid of those documents because they're significant, send them to the papal nuncio's office so that under cover of papal immunity, those documents will be maintained in Washington, D.C.
Again, because they think they're above the law and they don't need to cooperate with secular authority. We'll investigate internally. Nothing to see here. Move along. Yeah,
Exactly, and they have the ability to do good. Uh, it's just that they choose to sit on their hands and allow the evil to happen.
and that's why you had to leave. Live your authentic self. Well, I mean,
The
that took
bottom line.
courage. That took a lot of courage for you to do that. So I
It's
applaud
really
your,
scary.
your
When you leave a religious order, you have no assets. You don't have a credit rating. You don't, you have a checking account. You get, basically $100 for a little spending money, but you own nothing.
yeah, that must have been really scary then
It's
to just go
very,
with your checking account. Well, that's why they set up
and
the Clergy Project. If you're aware of the Clergy Project, it was set up by Freedom from Religion Foundation to help provide, basically information for people wanting to leave the priesthood and some counseling and job retraining and support. So, yeah, I guess that wasn't there for you when you
there was
left.
no clergy project in the 1990s. No, no,
Yeah,
no.
but you had the courage to leave, so I applaud your bravery and your honesty. So, and
I appreciate it, and that's one of the best things is I uh, have the moral clarity to know that I protect kids and that I did not look away, where the vast majority of priests remain silent and they just look away. And, um, in the long run, they will be ultimately judged by that.
yeah, well, like the institution has lost any moral authority it had. I don't think they have the standing to proclaim anything. They just look so horrendously bad. So,
Yeah, and I can say that in my 30 years now that the reputation of a priest has completely flipped. It used to be, that if a priest made a statement before a civil court, the judge would take that as gospel, as true, and as a reputable person of the society and of the community. And now, when you poll a jury and you ask them, um, they basically, whenever they put up a priest witness or a bishop or whatever, they ultimately don't believe them. I mean, it's completely flipped about
yeah,
uh, who is true and who is a person of integrity. Unfortunately, the bishops have lost that.
Rightly so. They should have spoken up. You'd think one of them would have had, enough moral integrity to do so. At least you had enough to leave. So, and to work to choose a career working with these people. So that's admirable.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And the other thing that people probably don't know is that there are over 40 bishops that have been perpetrators. So even within the bishops' ranks, um, they don't even report on one another, even though that they have bad people in their own higher echelon of ranks. And the Cardinal McCarrick story is probably the easiest one to explain that if someone can rise to the level of being a cardinal and the lead cardinal in the United States, interacting with in Washington D.C. with the federal government, um, you know, just a few votes shy of being pope, then things are rotten to the core if someone can rise that high in the institution.
Yeah. Yeah. What goes back to the one of the so as I mentioned off screen. So in the research I did for my book, I wrote the Wikipedia article one for Acts of Sylvester, but two for the Constitutum Sylvestri, which was there was no information. It was mentioned as a forgery from 501 from the trial of Pope Symmachus. And so where was this council? When was this council? So I started digging into it. And then out of so it was essentially held in Rome in 324, ostensibly this Council of Sylvester. Out of this council came two canons. One, that the Pope cannot be tried, and that's still in Catholic canon law today. You can look it up, it's 1404. The Pope cannot be tried. That comes from this 6th century forgery from the Council of the Constitutum Sylvestri. The other one was that a bishop can only be tried by 72 other bishops. So,
Yes, yeah,
and
and this goes back to the principle that everything that we're dealing with today comes from the patristic period. And if there was any one thing that I think where a reformation needs to happen is to go back and truly study the patristic period to learn the lessons that we should have learned a long time ago and then
yeah,
apply it to how we live today.
and that's not going to happen. It might.
You know,
So I don't know if you know Hans Kung. He was a very well-respected Swiss theologian, and Hans Kung. So I actually dedicated my book to him, and I conclude with him. He's my final. I said, well, it's dedicated to him. Let's wrap up. And he stated that there needs to be a third Vatican Council to finish the reforms. They either didn't happen and were needed at the time, or got quashed under John Paul and this re-centralization of the church. So yes, there might well indeed be a third Vatican Council, but who knows when that's going to happen. So
well, if you look at the ebbs and flows of monastic history, it's usually that things have to peak and they have to fall dramatically. And there has to be where the institution is basically brought to its knees before any kind of change happens.
yeah, well, both
And I
both
don't
Kung
think we're there
and
yet.
Kung and John Cornwell and the Pope and Winter, they both made exactly the same point that under John Paul, millions of Catholics, priests and laity, left the church. So
And
yeah,
the data in Germany is very clear. Uh, as you know, we have that weird statistic to be able to watch on how many Catholics contribute through the taxation system in Germany. And it's been a complete decline now for several decades.
yeah, there won't be much left coming in.
Well, essentially, there's a lot of humility that happens when an institution doesn't have financial resources. Then you have to return to the spiritual life.
Yeah. Well, they're probably approaching rock bottom with the bankruptcies and the millions that are leaving. So
Oh,
the
no,
and like
no. I
No,
can tell you
not yet.
the, the bankruptcies are a financial gift to the Roman Church in the United States that they get away with 15 cents on the dollar. And all of their core assets are not touched.
So it's like a fly. It's just an annoyance. So, okay.
Yeah, I think as we were talking about previously, LA has now, the Archdiocese of Los Angeles has paid now, what, $1.5 billion over two major settlements. And it doesn't really affect their operations.
Scary. Well, I mean, we can hope. We see Francis stacking the cardinals with reformers, so maybe the next pope will be from the reformist camp. And we're seeing the older reactionary tradition, ultra traditionalists. These guys are dying off in the next decade. So, and if you've got Francis appointing lots of young reformers, maybe we'll see this in our lifetime, a third council.
I'd say that the two of the most conservative institutions in the world is the practice of law and the Roman Church. And so I don't see any major reformations happening in either in our lifetimes.
Yeah. They're not brought to their knees yet before that's required. So okay. Well, we'll see. I mean, I'll have to see what happens with the next pope, who gets voted in, like if he's going to be continue the reforms of Francis and trying to overhaul things. So, obviously, it's old, it's traditional, they're going to go kicking and screaming, but
Oh,
as the
definitely. Yeah.
really hardcore ultra traditionalists, die out. So be interesting to see.
We'll see if there is an aggiornamento with all of the data that Rome has, that could bring about uh, quite the reformation. Yeah.
Well, we just have to wait and see. So hopefully, we keep doing the work we're doing to bring them, hold them accountable, and maybe things will slowly sink in. So okay.
Over
Well,
time, potentially. Yep.
yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Patrick. I appreciate the time. I've wanted to talk to you for a long time, so I'm glad we finally got the chance to connect and we could find some time. So we mentioned earlier Father Thomas Doyle. So there's a book, Sex, Priests, and Secret Codes by Richard Sipe, by Thomas Doyle, and by Patrick Wall. It's a long paper trail, but I think is part of your subtitle is about the 2,000-year paper trail of abuse. So check it out. It's a great book. It's in my collection, so I highly recommend it. It's got some useful stats, or not useful, shocking, I would say. So, but anyway, so thank you very much, Patrick. I really appreciate your time today, and please, continue doing the work you're doing. It's admirable and it needs to be done. And I'm glad you had the moral authority or moral integrity to step up and do it. So
Appreciate it, Jason. Thank you much.
you're welcome. All right. So thanks everybody, and we'll see everybody on the next episode. Take care. Bye bye. Thanks for watching. Please check out the other videos on my channel if history is your thing, and see you next time.